This story has been submitted by a subscriber. Mr. Smiley by Catherine Treglown. I have been plagued by the same sleep paralysis nightmare on and off since I attended middle school. For this story, I am going to call the creature from my nightmare Mr. Smiley, for lack of a better name. Whenever he visits, it has always been the same horrible routine. Now, before I tell you about my visits from this demon, let me tell you all that I know about Mr. Smiley. First, by describing what he looks like in the hope that somebody may recognize him. For the last 13 years, I have never been able to see any details of this humanoid figure. Even on the rare occasion he visited me on the nights I fell asleep with a regular bedside lamp on, it has always been just a solid black shape. Except for his eyes, and of course the reason I call him Mr. Smiley. He bears an ear-to-ear smile with large, sharp, pointed white teeth. After all this time, I am still not sure how he was able to show all those teeth like the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland, let alone how all those huge teeth fit into that monster's skull. His eyes, sunken into his skull, are wide, unblinking, and glossy black. There are no other facial features that I can discern. Like his body, it is just solid black. And from the times I have stared into his eyes, I have never been able to tell if those eyes used to be human, or belonged only to a demon, like the ones my grandmother told me about. A fetch, or maybe a slough, in her old Irish folklore stories. Now, let me tell you about the first night Mr. Smiley came to visit me. I thought I had just woken up from a nightmare. In my bed, of course, lying on my back, soaked in cold sweat. My covers were kicked off my bed, but I was unable to move my body. Now, I have experienced sleep paralysis before then, so I knew pretty quickly that it was only a nightmare, and I believed, like the others, if I didn't fight, it would be over soon. But I was wrong. So wrong. I was only able to look around the room with my eyes, and I could not make a sound. My old digital alarm clock blinked at the time. It was around 1:15 in the morning. That's when I caught a movement in the corner of my eye. And he was standing there, outlined by the faintest of light coming through the fabric of my curtains. A tall, thin, all-black silhouette that seemed to tower over me from across the room. I stared at him for what seemed like a few minutes before he finally, slowly smiled at me and opened his eyes. That smile, even when I am awake, I can never forget it. My blood turned cold and I could not breathe. When my eyes jumped away from the smile, they locked onto those black voids, and I felt a red-hot burning pain rising out through my entire body. I felt a scream tear at my throat as I squeezed my eyes shut against the pain, my mind going blank. After a minute, the pain subsided, and I weakly opened my eyes thinking that the nightmare had to be over. But to my horror, Mr. Smiley was still there, but a couple of feet closer to my bed. And once again, his eyes locked onto mine, and the pain shot through me worse than before. I could feel my muscles screaming to move, to run away from this pain, to run away from this monster. This game continued to play out twice more until he was standing by the side of my bed. I was in so much pain that all I could do was pray silently for it to be over. Then, like nothing had happened, my alarm clock went off, and I found myself tumbling out of my bed. I was finally awake. Shaken, but once I realized the nightmare was over, I was so relieved that I just went on with my day, only mentioning the nightmare in passing. I had no idea then what awaited me in the nights to come. There has been no rhyme or reason for the nights he came to visit me. It doesn't matter where I am or if I had another human being or even a pet in the bed with me. Because of the paralysis, it never mattered. He would always appear standing in front of my window, the outside light outlining his tall and thin silhouette, and as we watched each other, we would start playing what has become our sadistic game. I have never dared shut my eyes again when he came around or tried keeping them closed to avoid looking at him, thinking it would break me out of my paralysis. It leaves me feeling more exposed to any attack he may make. Not to mention I can still sense him there. Soon, Even on the nights he visits and somehow I wake up on my own, it feels like he never truly leaves even after I wake up from the nightmare, like he is hiding in the shadows or still peering at me from somewhere unseen. Not until the sun rose over the hills in my old neighborhood. I have only ever really lost our deadly little game once, and I nearly lost my life. It was just like any other night, for the most part. I can play the game to the point Mr. Smiley would only get to the end of my bed. But this night, he had gotten close enough to bend over, face to face with me, and his hands disappearing into my abdomen. There was no blood, no torn flesh, just his hands seemingly ghosting through my belly. His smile had widened, and his mouth slowly started to open in a snarl. I felt his hands clutch something inside my stomach. This is where the pain grew so intense I sat straight up in bed, screaming my head off, making both my fiancé and dogs wake up. I didn't see him after that for nearly a month, but the next few weeks after that incident I would have a throbbing pain in my gut, couldn't keep any food or drink down, and real serious constipation, I'll admit. My fiancé found me passed out cold on the floor, and the next thing I knew, I was brought into the emergency room for surgery. Now, according to my doctor and my emergency room surgeon, my ongoing battle with Crohn's disease had gotten so bad that the inflammation closed off my bowel, successfully obstructing it. During surgery, I had died for 2 minutes due to a hidden bleed. I do remember what happened when I died, but I'll leave that story for another time. I woke up about a week later to a large scar up the center of my stomach. When Mr. Smiley visited me in the hospital, he stood outside the room against the opposite wall. While I was in the recovery wing because I kept being woken up by machines and nurses checking on me, Mr. Smiley was never able to get inside the room. Part of me thought that he could not come in at all, maybe due to the fact that I was in a Catholic hospital that still houses priests and nuns. But it was so long ago and I was on so many pain, nausea, and other types of after-surgery medications that I cannot remember much of those nights. Now, to make things clear, I'm not going to say that Mr. Smiley caused my body to fail as it did. I have known since my diagnosis that there was always the potential it could happen if my medication ever failed, and since I was on newer medication at the time. It has been ruled as a treatment failure and can all be medically explained. But a part of me does wonder, is the Mr. Smiley some sort of ghost or demon that has latched onto me, something my mind created to warn me of danger? But if these were the cases, why has he been around for these last 13 years? Or is he an actual omen of death? I have tried telling my story on forums throughout Reddit like this one before, but still haven't found any answers or serious suggestions through my fellow readers. I am hoping that this is just my overactive imagination taking all my stress, fears, and anxiety, creating a monster in my subconscious, and then showing me very clearly, in nightmare form, what my true fears are. Pain, my illness, losing control over my body and voice. How my life can be turned around in seconds. I know my feelings aren't new. Everyone can relate to my feelings in some way. But still, to have this creature appear in my room at night, putting me through hours of pain, even after my disease went into remission and I was free for the longest time from those fears. My life was getting back on track. My boyfriend and I turned husband and wife and have finally started talking about having children, despite all my fears and all that I will have to prepare for. Now I am going to tell you of the main reason that I now decided to write about Mr. Smiley today in a desperate plea for help. A few nights ago, I lost for the second time since he started tormenting me 13 years ago. Like always, he started by my window, his body clearly outlined against the rain falling against the open curtain. My husband was working the night shift, so it was just me and my black Labrador puppy lying in our master bedroom in the apartment complex we are living in. I had just found out that day that my Crohn's disease had returned and was emotionally and physically weakened from the news. After over 4 hours, he had made his way to lean over my paralyzed form. By this point, my eyes stung from the strain of keeping them open and tears running down my cheeks. I feared that my body would fail me again if he touched me, but I couldn't keep my eyes open and close them tight, feeling my body trembling as the pain subsided. After a moment, I slowly opened my eyes. His hands were deep inside my lower abdomen, just like before. No blood, no torn flesh. His smile was slowly widening into the same snarl, but there was no longer pain, but a cold numbness throughout my body. With his eyes still on my face, he slowly pulled his hands out of my body. There, in the dark void that was his hands, was a small form, and I could not stop myself from staring at it. But for once, while I was looking away, he didn't move any further towards me. It was a small baby. A girl. She reminded me of my little brother when he was born too soon, but there was something else wrong with her. Her skin was a chalky grey with dark bruises across her tiny premature body. She was having trouble breathing on her own, I could tell. I wanted to reach out and snatch her from his hands, believing desperately that if I could get her away from Mr. Smiley, I could help her. But I couldn't move, and as I lay there staring at what I realized was my baby girl, he curled his fingers and simply squeezed them sharply closed around her little body. I could hear her bones cracking as she let out one brief cry. It was sickening, and as I felt a scream tear through my throat, he raised her to his mouth, which had spread open, and dropped her down his throat. I woke up screaming, sitting up fast and trying to climb away from the spot where Mr. Smiley was standing. My puppy woke up and started barking. As soon as I had realized I could move, I felt my stomach lurch, and before I made it out of the room, I had thrown up what was left of my only meal that day on the floor. My elderly neighbour came banging on my door before I had stopped heaving. Then I practically ran to the door and collapsed in her arms, crying. She ended up calling the police before my husband, and they found me wrapped up in a blanket with my neighbour gently rubbing my back. I couldn't even feel embarrassed about having to tell the officers that I just had a nightmare. My husband, who knows I've had these terrors for years, was able to explain it away, saying I have had previous experiences of bad reactions to sedation used in medical procedures, and he should have alerted my neighbour or had one of his sisters stay with me that night while he was at work. Which wasn't untrue, but they were concerned. But eventually they left, and my neighbour told my husband she'd stay the rest of the night with me while he returned to work. I didn't sleep, and so I ended up taking the next day off and began writing this down. This all took place back in March of 2020. Please, is there anyone out there who knows what Mr. Smiley is? I need to know so I can protect me and my family. He hasn't returned, but I fear the next time we meet. And I just don't think I could stand him taking away another unborn child from me again. All I can bear to remember of her was her first and last cry. Thank you for watching and/or listening to this video. I hope you enjoyed my narration of this story, and if you did, please help my channel to grow by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I've been experimenting with some new audio equipment, so I do apologize if this sounds a little different from my usual videos. I hope any differences aren't too off-putting. I know this video is a bit shorter than what I'm normally releasing these days. I'm just taking a bit of extra time compiling some Dogman, Wendigo and Skinwalker stories that I want to release in the next upcoming months. If you have any stories you'd be happy for me to narrate on my channel, please send them my way. Email me at mrsinisterstories@gmail.com. Thanks again for watching.